Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this event on access to higher education for refugee women. How can we help? My name is Lisa Prügel. I'm a professor at the Graduate Institute, and I'm the co-director of the Gender Center at the Graduate Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today on behalf of our director, who unfortunately is not able to join us tonight. I would like to thank our partner, Switzerland, for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency National Partner Association in Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. It was established just in 2020, just before the lockdown, I just learned, to raise awareness and mobilize essential resources to enable UNHCR to carry out its mission. We're very pleased to organize this event with them. I also would like to thank two women's groups, Giving Women and Women's Business Society, who are supporting this event. Thank you. Why focus on higher education for refugee women? It seems like a luxury. Why should refugee women have higher education? But it's certainly not. In today's knowledge society, being able to succeed requires advanced degrees. However, only 5% of the refugee population has access to higher education, compared to 39% of the general population, and that figure is even lower for women. There are thus significant inequalities that hold refugee women back. But I'd like to argue that higher education also needs refugee women. The ivory tower is populated by white men still. We would hope this is a thing of the past, but it is not. And we're working hard today to increase diversity in our institutions because we know that different people know different things, that they will do different research, and that they will teach different content. And so as a result, we will have better knowledge that reflects diverse points of views, experiences, and needs. At the Graduate Institute, we try to do our part in this, and we're very fortunate to be part of an initiative called Horizon Académique, which is a program for persons with refugee background or asylum-seeking status who wish to pursue a university degree. This is a one-year program that was launched by the University of Geneva in 2016, and it seeks to provide the foundations for entering a university degree program, including French lessons, study skills training, peer mentoring, and the option to participate in regular university courses without being officially enrolled. We're very proud to be part of this program, and while most beneficiaries so far have entered undergraduate programs and therefore stayed at the university, we're very excited about the fact that we have now our first applications into our doctoral program from this program. I will not hold this up any longer and turn over the days to Moira Faul in just a minute, who will be moderating this event, but I need to introduce her. Moira is the executive director of NORRAG, and Moira, you need to tell people what that stands for. I always forget. It's an global education initiative, can I call it like that? She's also a visiting professor at the Graduate Institute. Prior to this post, Moira was deputy director of the Public-Private Partnership Center at the University of Geneva and a visiting research fellow at UNRISD, the UN Research Institute for Social Development. She's originally from Zimbabwe, and holds a degree, a PhD, from the University of Cambridge, and brings substantial expertise in international cooperation. But before I turn over the floor to Moira, I should announce that Switzerland for UNHCR would like to show a video of the UNHCR Daffy Tertiary Scholarship Program. I hope I said that right, DAFI Tertiary Scholarship Program, which aims to offer qualified refugee and returnee students the possibility to earn an undergraduate degree in their country of asylum or in their home country. UNHCR is determined to increase enrollment of young refugees in higher education from 3 to 15% by 2030. And I guess this program is part of this effort. So I yield the floor and ask for the film to be started, I guess.
Hello, my name is Igede and I'm a Davies scholar and I'll be studying human resource. I'm from Rwanda and I'll be studying in Malawi.
Hi, my name is Lejo. I'm from Rwanda. I'm a Davies scholar. I'll be studying a degree in environmental health and I'll be studying here in Malawi.
My name is Musa. I am part of the class of 2025 and I'm so glad to be aiming higher.
The feeling of being accepted for Davies Scholar, I just couldn't express it because I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. The reason why I chose to study human resource is because firstly, I get to interact with people. I get to know what their problems are and I get to help them. My God, if I hadn't received this scholarship, I honestly don't know what I would have been doing. Being raised by my mother alone was a challenge. So I'm with my mom. Mama, hi.
Hey, ndinasangarara kwambiri. Ndipo ndinatokoza Mulungu kuti Mulungu yayanka amavuta yanga ifukwa mwana gakara wopunzira amatandiza soma koro kusogoro komaso.
This nakazo na base scholarship pagara bano bezititata.
Ezo makara pasi nanga ukukara.
I'm looking forward to graduating with a distinction, hopefully, and getting a nice job, helping out with my mom, everything.
Is that on? Yes, I can hear it is. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Prugel, for that introduction to the evening, and thank you to Switzerland for UNHCR for that fantastic video. I am absolutely thrilled to be moderating this panel. We have a fascinating panel for you. Right next to me here, we have Aya Mohammed Abdullah, who fled Iraq to Syria at the age of 14 and then fled Syria. She currently studies at Webster University, studying international relations and media communication. We also have Atalanti Moquette, who founded Giving Women, a network of diverse but like-minded women who pool their professional skills and experience to provide advice to strengthen projects that are directed at vulnerable girls and women globally. And here on my right, Jackie Strecker has been working with UNHCR since 2012, managing UNHCR's educational innovation portfolio, and currently leads the Connected Education program. And Bernhard should be being beamed onto the screen behind me. Thank you, tech people. He is the Associate Professor of International Education and International Affairs at George Washington University. His research looks comparatively at the impact of globalization on the internationalization of higher education, focusing on migrants and refugees, as well as student mobility and international campuses. So, a warm welcome to all of you. The first question that we have for the panel tonight is focused on challenges and constraining factors for refugee women in their ability to access higher education. So Aya, first of all, what was it that allowed you to access higher education here in Geneva?
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be with all of you here tonight. And as it was mentioned in the previous video, when the lady said that it was something unbelievable. So normally, if you are living under normal conditions, you are kind of aiming for that process, and you know that there is the day will come and you will go to the university, for example, and you will finish the studies and you will have the dream about it. But being a refugee will double the struggles for this dream. And so basically for me, it was like a dream coming true. And believe me, I cried a lot when I got the letter of accept to the Webster University, and I was very stressed about it. What can I do and so on, but it was really lovely. And so I want to mention that for women, it's in everywhere. There's a struggle of enrolling in higher education, even in other regions, and even if they are not refugees, but being a woman and a refugee, and even from a particular region could make things even worse. So I really struggled, and I can just mention a few things that I have struggled, not only enrolling in or trying to enroll in higher education, but even in the secondary education for me in different countries. So I can speak about language barriers, or I can talk about gender inequalities, even if I don't want to say this, but unfortunately it's a fact. And I would mention the administrative challenges, because for some places, institutions, universities, they ask you to bring a paper and you are even not allowed to go back to your country. You don't have the passport of your country. You don't have the ID of your country. How are you supposed to bring these documents? So they are trying to make it very complicated, not only complicated, but it seems impossible for some of people. But let's talk about the positive side of it. And basically, because today I'm talking to you as a student, senior student, graduating in May, hopefully. The things that helped me, and especially in Geneva, was two things that I was gonna mention, which is the information, which was from a local woman here in Switzerland who told me that you can go to this and you try to find alternatives, you know, because I went and I tried and they told me I was old in the beginning. They did it, I was only 22, by the way. And I was shocked, to be honest. I was like, oh, but did I really get old and I didn't feel about it? But really, this is what I was like informed, and I was very shocked. They didn't tell me go learn the language and come back. They didn't tell me go finish these courses and then come back. They just told me I'm old, and I was like, well, I don't think this is it. And then when I met this woman, she told me, there's Webster University here, there's the private universities that may help you with it. And the second thing helped me was the opportunity given by the university itself. So here we can see that the private sector could play a role as well. We are not supposed just to think that only public universities or only public institutions can give access to higher education. Also other institutions and private sector can play a big role. So yeah, just to summarize, it was information and opportunity. And this is what we have to increase more. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Is it on again? Yes, thank you so much. Atalanti, over to you next. What is it that you found gets in the way of refugee women accessing higher education?
Well, I think that Aya, and it's wonderful to have Aya with us, she's our star, has mentioned the multifold challenges in terms of administrative challenges, having the right credentials, speaking the language, really there are many barriers on the way, as well as status, as well as financial barriers. All those things are really a struggle. And so I think anybody who goes through all of that and makes it to the university shows incredible resilience. And I think this is one of the power of the refugee population, is their resilience and their persistence. But I think that we need to look at this as two cohorts of young people. We have the young people that have arrived into a country like Switzerland who have had a secondary education, have that potential to actually reach secondary, to go to tertiary. But I often worry, and I'm Greek myself, and I've seen the refugee children who are on the islands who are accessing a very poor kind of primary education, let alone getting to secondary education, to allow these young people to eventually get to tertiary education. So I think we need to think about this in a much, much more long-term way, because coming up, there are so many young kids who haven't even had access to a basic education. So we can't even talk about tertiary if we don't get that part right. And yes, there are many conventions that say that the host countries are responsible to provide primary education. You go to the host country and tell me how well it's going. So I think those, for me, that's a big barrier, is we're dealing with a cohort that comes in, people like Aya, a lot of young people coming out of Syria, coming out of Afghanistan, who have young women who have had really, really good educations and can access tertiary. But then think of all the ones that are 7, 8, 9, who've left as migrants, have had this most horrendous experience and have not received education. So for me, that's an area we really need not forget.
Absolutely, and certainly the Graduate Institute is one of the founding members of the Geneva Global Hub for Education in Emergencies, which is looking to improve exactly that, both access and quality for refugee children and for all children internally displaced who are on the move and, as Atalanti says, in very difficult situations. And so, Jackie, what is it then that you have found in UNHCR?
Thank you. Well, I think my other two panelists have covered a huge amount of the challenges. So let me just add to it by bringing to light some of the numbers. So 86% of refugees are housed in host communities in the neighboring countries. So when you talk about host countries, when you talk about the few who make it to countries like Switzerland, when we're looking at investing in education, it's really important that we look at that figure. 86% are housed in neighboring countries. And so we really do need to work on ways that we can support education systems within neighboring countries to really make sure that as we educate them throughout the continuum, they're getting a quality education. What we found as well, and this is particularly stark for girls, is as you work your way up through the education continuum, you see dropout rates. So we have 68% of refugee children attending primary education. That number dramatically goes down when you look at secondary. It's only 34%. And when we make it all the way to tertiary, it's only 5% of eligible refugees that are having access. And across all of these figures, the number is lower for women. And so it's really important that we look at that support, that continuation, and that we provide greater opportunities at the secondary level, but also create the mentors, the inspiration for girls to stay enrolled so that they see the opportunities that they have at the tertiary level, because we know that this is where some of the most valuable gains are made when it comes to education, both for individuals and for families. So I think many of the things that you've talked about when it comes to languages, when it comes to recognition of credentials, officials when it comes to discrimination sometimes and cultural norms against females being valued for education. All of those pieces are critical challenges that we need to look for ways of overcoming. And I think there are solutions that are out there, but as you noted, it's about getting the information to the right people, creating those networks, and really doing more to invest within these areas, because I think this is what's key. We've got the solutions, we just really now need to look at how we scale them.
Thank you very much. And Bernhard from Washington, is that similar in American contexts? What have you found?
All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for letting me be part of this panel today. I'm really honored. My old doctor advisor, Professor Gita Steiner-Kamsi, made this possible. I also want to thank my graduate student, Kira Hoyne, who was instrumental in pulling together notes for today. I'll just say that the work I do is not focused directly on women refugees, but it is focused broadly on refugee access to higher education. And I've done this on both sides of the Atlantic, in Berlin, in Germany as a case study, and then also in the US with various organizations. I'm really thrilled to be part of this today. And I have, in particular, sort of anecdotal evidence of students really being very passionate about these issues and wanting to get really involved and doing more to help refugee students. It's anecdotal evidence, but there's strong support for that among students I work with. So to the question of constraining factors that I see in the US context, really, we did a study in 2020 for a Comparative Education Review Journal about what is being done at higher education levels in the US. And we found actually an increasing number of institutions really working together to develop innovative policies that are clearly aimed at promoting inclusion of these populations. And I'll mention some of these later on in our discussion. I can say that in US history, migrants have generally, with some exceptions for sure, been seen as beneficial to our economy and good for the diversity of our society. Now, however, as was just announced yesterday in Sweden's International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance report on the global state of democracy, the US is also identified as backsliding. So it would seem that the US, along with increasing number of countries, are seeing the legal, social, economic, and cultural integration of immigrants and refugees as a burden, as something unduly challenging and unproductive to their policymaking. Or even to be feared as carriers of COVID or looking for violence and disruption of systems. And nothing could be further from the truth. There's just no evidence that refugees and migrants are among the troublemakers, if you will, generally speaking, or specifically speaking. So we are a federal system in the US, and there are really state-by-state differences in how they respond to refugees. But I think the things our students struggle with, our refugee students in particular, are very high tuition costs for study. Our Congress can't even agree on authorizing 2 years of free community college, and they can't agree on student loan debt relief. The flow of information, I think, is difficult, again, because it's an uneven federal system. But there are energetic efforts also to help within the higher ed sector, and I'll touch on these later. Just to conclude this part of the remarks, an organization I'm involved with called the University Alliance for Refugees and At-Risk Migrants has 6 action areas that we're pushing. One of them is focused on complementary pathways, the UN's complementary pathways for safe, regulated avenues that would complement formal resettlement. We also are speaking out against actions that would reduce the numbers of refugee students. And as you know, the Biden administration massively improved that cap from the very shameful number that Trump had imposed. We're doing research on the issue, and we're really trying to reshape the narrative in the public sphere about just understanding who refugees are, what they're dealing with when they come to another culture, and how they really can make a very positive difference. So we have our challenges, and I think those challenges are growing because of the politically fraught environment we're in, but I also have reason to see a lot of hope.
Thank you very much, Bernhard. And so the next question for our panelists is regarding the partners in improving access to higher education. which Aya touched on already in her her first answer. So Atalanti, overcoming these barriers that we've just summarized is an enormous job. Who is it that you work with to overcome them in Giving Women?
So it's actually, I have an experience actually based... Oh, my God.
Thank you.
I don't have such a loud voice. Yeah, so I think Aya's comments were really interesting because it showed that the private sector is one that really, really does support education and private sector universities. And I'm working with a small organization in Greece for women who are survivors of gender-based violence, and we have a shelter, and we provide Greek lessons, etc. And a livelihood program. And recently I was told that one of our women was actually going to university. And I was, really, really excited by it. And I said, but, how is she accessing university? Is she going to the University of Athens and so on? And of course, University of Athens is in Greek and it's difficult to get in and so on. And she said, no, she's going to a private American university. And they had offered her a place and they'd offered her a scholarship. And so I was really, really excited by it. So I went onto their site and read that they clearly had very, very developed values about providing access to everybody, no matter what the financial strengths were. So I think that kind of encouragement from the from the private sector to really provide that kind of access in the same way that you went to Webster and not to the University of Geneva. I think it's really interesting how that those partnerships with the private sector, with the public sector, with governments. I know that Switzerland has really made a declaration that they want to do everything to give access to refugee students to their public universities as well. But as we said, often one of the issues around that is credentials. It's all the administrative sides which a private university is able to overcome in a much easier way. So I think for me, that private partnership is really valuable.
Thank you very much. And what about in UNHCR, Jackie?
So maybe I'll pick up on the university piece because I do think universities are key, and UNHCR actually partnered with the University of Geneva to form the Connected Learning in Crises Consortium, which now has about 33 different members, both universities as well as NGOs and different actors in higher education. And this consortium looks at innovative ways that we can provide tertiary education, leveraging technology to provide blended options no matter where people reside. And I think what's been great about this work is really universities themselves driving innovation within this space, really recognizing their role in providing tertiary education as a public good, but really also wrestling with this idea on how can we provide rich platforms for dialogue and for exchange, which really move the needle on what tertiary or higher education is for everyone. And so I think universities play a really important role, both from creating the opportunities for these programs to exist, but also from the research perspective and understanding and unpacking what works and why it works, and helping us make the case for greater investments in this space. The last one that I'll just add, if you'll allow me, is also students themselves and others from the general population, I think, have a huge role to play in this. Just a quick note, I'm Canadian. I got interested in refugee work when I was a university student and found a program that actually helped to sponsor refugees to study at my university. And we all paid a small amount of money that actually helped to cover the refugee scholars, their tuition, their housing, all of these different pieces. And it ended up being something like $5 a year that we all committed. But being a university of around 40,000 people, that was enough to regularly sponsor refugees and provide this life-changing opportunity. So I think we all have a role to play in really looking at how we can make these changes.
Definitely. And you reminded me, talking about blended learning opportunities, to welcome also our online audience. We have a large group of people who are following this event online through WebEx. and did not brave the cold in Geneva this evening to come out. So you all did, well done. But welcome also to our online audience. Right, so Aya, in your experience, what is it that you've seen?
Okay, so we talked a lot about the barriers, we talked about the challenges, but I need also to give you facts with numbers. And I know that we humans, I mean, including myself, when we hear numbers, we forget sometimes that we're talking about human beings like us. So when we say, for example, that in 2019, it was only 1% of the refugee population accessing higher education. It's 1%, but it's like really nothing. I mean, we are talking about only 1% in 2019. And today, in 2021, we reached the 5%, which is already a big process, like in 2 years. I don't know what happened. Even if it's a miracle, I'm welcoming this, and I hope that we will continue to have more development and reaching more people and make them, how can I say, actually to help them, to give them another chance to live a normal life, if I may say that. Because if it's really easy. I'm not talking all about refugees here. I'm talking in general. If we are aiming for a better world without poverty, violence, conflict, many researchers, and we believe ourselves that education is a main key. So this is why here the cooperation is really important. As you mentioned, even me as an individual, I can play a role in this by taking the responsibility, or even the private sector, the universities, the government, NGOs, INGOs. So I think really here we need to consider that we solve the root of the problem, not only the surface of it, because this is what we see. It's like a show, okay, let's just like put the fire down, but then what about the future of these people? I mean, if we talk about the Iraqi situation from 2003 until 2021, now this generation is enrolling in universities. So this is really long term, and if we don't give the opportunity for this generation to be educated, then this cycle will go on and on, because there will be hate, there will be anger. I want to take the revenge, why this happened to me. Instead of this, we really want a peaceful world more, and we can reach it for sure by giving more opportunities of education, and especially for women, because really we have a saying in Arabic that التعليم هو سلاح المرأة, which means the education is the woman's weapon, but a defense weapon. It's not like something that we use for a bad, I don't want to give a bad reaction about the Arabic sayings. It's not like that, but really, because I remember that my mom told me this the whole time, and this is what it came to my mind, and I always come to the point that I say, I lost the battle. I cannot do it anymore. The doors are just shutting in my face. I will stop. But then I just remember that I need to do this for myself and to prove to myself that I am able, as a woman, as a Muslim, on top of that, as a refugee, that I became to this, and I can, and if I can, then others can. I consider myself lucky, to be honest, and I will tell you this, because when I was in Turkey, I had to work. I couldn't study. Maybe if the Davies scholarship was allowed for me to take at that point, maybe I would be graduated by the month, but everything happens for a reason, and I'm still happy that I'm here, and I have this opportunity. But really, when I hear about the Davies scholarship, the initiatives, the people who are trying to push for more education opportunities for refugees, I feel really happy for people who remain and still in host countries, and even for people who are still in their home countries, but they are not able to finish their studies. And as I said, I'm not talking here only about higher education, I'm even talking about primary and secondary education as well. So yes, cooperation, cooperation, cooperation.
And thank you very much, Aya, for that reminder about the human beings behind the numbers and the importance, particularly when we're talking about women refugees, that this is something that is also for women. Sometimes the women themselves get lost in narratives of it's good to educate women because it's good for their children. It's good to educate women because it's good for economic growth. It's also good to educate women because it's good for women. So we mustn't lose sight of that particular fact as well. Bernhard, on your side, what kinds of partnerships do you see from an academic institution, from a research institution that's also hosting some of these refugee women students?
Yeah, thank you. Here's where I really see a lot of promise and a lot of hope for the future. And I'll just second Jackie's comments about students, in my view, really are the backbone of what I think can happen and is happening in terms of support for refugee students. I saw this both in Germany when I was looking at the DAAD welcome program at numerous universities. That was driven largely by students going to their higher level administrators and saying, we need to do something. And that's been the case here as well. We have another of my students, Olivia Issa, who is part of No Lost Generation, and that's got a chapter at GW, and she is leading an effort to get a proposal from our president to support refugee scholars and students. So that is a student, she's an undergraduate. It's an incredible initiative she's doing. So, I mean, there's a lot happening. There's Guilford College's Every Campus a Refuge, that's in North Carolina. They have a program that's really a remarkable model for best practices, how colleges and universities can become refuges by following the model of hosting them on campus grounds, assisting them in resettlement, really offering their families a place to stay along with the student and or scholar. There's the Afghan Refugee School in Wisconsin, started by 3 Afghan women, set up an organization called Rise Up Again, or Rise Again. They have about 20 teachers and 200 students, ages 14 and up, 7 to 14, and they're housing 13, they're working with bases, local military bases where Afghans are being housed, and they're trying to help them get education at all different levels and training about how to live in the US. It's funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There's Boise State's Refugee Alliance, a bridge to higher education and integration, which is helping students. There's Brigham Young University's Project R, which is helping prospective and admitted college students resettled in the area through the resettlement program and supporting their development through peer mentorship. There's Bard College, which has also an international branch campus in Berlin, Germany, and it's offering alternative pathways to reduce barriers into higher education. Columbia University, probably the most well-known example, has its scholarship for displaced students. It's making huge strides in terms of providing students with full cost of attendance, and it's a model for how other universities could also adapt at their institutions, this idea of tailoring the local community's global mission to leverage the campus resources. Rice University has a program as well. There's also Scholars at Risk, of course, which is a national organization through the Institute of International Education. They have a chapter at New York University. They help displaced scholars. And then the Student Emergency Initiative, also of the Institute for International Education, helps create opportunities for collaboration in the field of higher education where people are dealing with emergency situations. So, I mean, that's really just a snapshot, but I really feel a lot of reason to be positive when thinking about what can happen at a civil society level and within the tertiary sector, regardless of what the national government or states sort of struggling against each other for political reasons may or may not want to do. I think a lot can happen at individual institutions and is happening.
Thank you very much, Bernhard. And the last question for our panel before we throw it open to the floor, so I hope you have your thinking hats on and are coming up with some great questions too, is really about just putting some words around the concept of value of tertiary education for and of women refugees. So Aya, can we turn to you for a personal view? What has accessing higher education meant for you? What does it mean for your future?
I wanted to say it this way. We know that education is playing a big role in rebuilding societies, right? So even for me as an individual, this higher education was an opportunity for me to find myself again after everything I have been through. Because believe me, I lived really hard, I won't say bad, but hard childhood. I was in a bad condition, really, going from one country to the other. I witnessed the Iraqi war, I witnessed the Syrian war, I went to Turkey and I lived through many other things as well, and now I'm resettled here. And before that, even I was in Jordan. So my life went like really, not the way that I wished it to go to, but I think that everything happened for a reason, and maybe this gave me the opportunity to be a stronger person and to be here today and to talk about and advocate about this problem and try to find solutions for it. So basically, it is the education for me is also a way to rebuild myself and bring my life again to the normal level, if I may say. Because as I mentioned before, in the beginning, when you forcibly become a refugee, in a moment you think about your own life. How do I survive at the beginning? What am I gonna eat? Where am I gonna sleep? How the shelter is gonna be, and all of these things. But then after a while, you start thinking about another direction. What am I gonna do with my future? I don't know, should I go to school? Should I work? Should I do this? Should I do that? So really, it is an opportunity to bring this life to a normal level, like as any other person does. And really, it made me feel confident as a woman that I will have a bachelor or maybe afterwards a master's, who knows, maybe PhD if I'm lucky, and if I stay in a safe environment. I mean, this really will bring confidence for me also, and this is the way that I can talk about this issue more, try to find solutions and encourage other women as well to do this. If I did this, why don't you do that? Or why will you not be able to do that? So I think this is a really important to mention that education is really a way that you find your own path or your own way. And this was it, and in very short. I cannot summarize a lot of years in like 1 minute, I'm really sorry, but this is what I'm thinking about at the moment.
Fascinating, thank you. And Jackie, from UNHCR's viewpoint, what benefits have you seen?
Well, I think many people that are stars like Aya that I've had the pleasure of having the opportunity to meet, and just seeing how much having this space to study, to reflect, to think about their futures and think about how they want to contribute to societies, really how that's changed the individual, their families, their communities, because I think that is something that's so important. And I think for me, what's so important about the value of these types of programs is it creates the space and the opportunities for people like Aya to be at the table to help also come up with the solutions. You know, you talked about creating also more peaceful societies. I think you guys are the game changers in a lot of ways in terms of how we're going to get towards that peace, how we're going to instill solutions to tackle the world's challenges, be it climate change, be it education for all. And so I think it's really important that tertiary education has that space and people have more opportunities for tertiary education. So you do have the platform to articulate yourself, to understand the future that you want, to think alongside peers and academics and help us bring that future to light. So I think really women have such an important role to play in shaping this future, and I think refugee women in particular, we all owe it to ourselves and to them to allow them to have that seat at that table as well.
Thank you. So Atalanti, what value have you seen coming through these programs?
So, first of all, I think Aya has said it all, and it's almost presumptuous of us to actually put words. You know, we haven't lived your life, we haven't experienced your life. However, and I think you're absolutely right. For me, everything that you summarized was that you have choices now, that you have the ability to make those choices about what your life's going to look like. And that has been helped by education. However, I think we need to be also very conscious that we all have a role to play in that, because you may have the ability to make those choices, but society also has to be sensitized and prepared to allow you to make those choices. So when you are applying for jobs, that people recognize that you're not a refugee, but you are Aya who has got a degree, that you have courage and you have strength, and that the fear that you had for your life has now changed into power in the way that you go. So I think that's a really, really important point for every single one of us here, in the way that we can facilitate people like Aya to really be able to realize her choices and her dreams. So I think that's, for me, one of the most important things. The other thing that I think, and we see it in life right in front of us, is the incredible role that people like yourself have to encourage young girls, young children who are looking and struggling in the way that you struggled and had the fears and the the difficulties that they have to face, that you give them hope, that you provide that kind of role model, which I think is so, so important for every single one of us. And you can be a role model for me as well. So I think that those are the things that I would say around going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So Bernhard, Atalanti shared that pull factor of role models for refugee children, refugee women. What do you see as the things that are sort of behind them, giving them some push to move forward in this space?
Yeah, let me also just quickly say that I liked Atalanti's comment in the sense that I think it's important that we're talking about students, and then we're talking about students of refugee background, not refugee students. I think that the labeling can be very stigmatizing, and we really don't need to, I encourage people, starting with my students and anyone I work with, to really talk about students, if need be, to say of refugee background. But they're just like anyone else, they're trying to continue with their education, having overcome incredible odds, and they're trying to make it work. So that's important. So as I noted in my opening remarks, I'm heartened that my own small anecdotal sample of the women in our graduate program, as well as people I've worked with, are so passionate to make a difference in the lives of refugees, even people they may never end up meeting. So I would argue that the large number of women that I see now passionately studying these issues would count as a push-up factor by drawing attention to the issue and supporting other women refugees. The lab that I started at my university called REAL, Refugee Educational Access Laboratory, has 10 dedicated female students who work voluntarily. We didn't have any quotas or anything, but it happened that 10 women were interested and one guy. So I think that speaks for itself, that there is great energy among our women students to make a difference. We're also working on a book called Accessing Quality Education for Refugees, Local and Global Perspectives, where we're going to profile the voices of local refugees from a broad array of countries and their experiences with educational access and quality in the context of displacement. And we think that by interviewing local refugees, we can better prepare research and influence policymakers to address these issues in a context-specific and sensitive manner. Again, the terminology is so important, and thereby hopefully bridge the gap between refugees' lived experiences and the programs and policies that impact them. So we want to go beyond what's much of the current scholarship, which I think still remains at a high statistical or theoretical level, and really frame personal stories of individual refugees just here in the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia area, with looking at a broad range of themes that they confront both here and globally. So we are definitely trying to get in and make a difference for people locally, but also tie that into the larger political narrative and hopefully make a difference that way.
Thank you very much, Bernhard. And one of the other things that Aya drew our attention to in her remarks earlier is the protracted and complex nature of the emergencies that refugees are living through and fleeing from. So when Aya says something starts in 2003 and now it's 2021, that makes an enormous difference, and that's a big change that's happening in the world of governance and policy, which is to actually recognize it's no longer enough to just say it's humanitarian and it's just an emergency response. It's recognizing that you need to be thinking and working in this humanitarian and development and peace nexus. So, having given you now a very, very complex thing, my last question to you all is to say, what is the one piece of advice that you would give us on how to improve the access of refugee women to higher education? And it can be advice to national governments, to development partners, international organizations, private sector, civil society organizations, or all of the above. Aya.
I'm glad to be the first because I will say all of the above. It's like the multiple choice questionnaire, but really all the above. Because if we talk about civil societies, individuals, governments, NGOs, INGOs, private sector, if each and every one of these work like to support the education and to expand the opportunities, then we will for sure achieve more and more. Because, I mean, if we talk about the national governments, for example, if they ease in the documentation problem, for example, that could help in a way. If we talk about NGOs, INGOs, governments maybe could create funding system for refugees to give them scholarships, to give them opportunities to do things, then that would help as well. And really, I hope that we will reach the point where education is the conflict resolution, not gun, not conflict, not war, none of these, because we really need this, and we saw and we have lessons from history. So why are we repeating these? I mean, we can break the cycle, but I think it's only by cooperation and support from all of the above and all of what I have mentioned before. So yeah, all of the above is always the right answer, to have all of the profit, you know.
Thank you so much, Aya. Atalanti.
So I totally agree. All of the above, collaboration, openness. And one thing we didn't talk about, and I think it's really an important aspect, is to recognize the incredible strength of this community and make our educational programs relevant so that the access to those choices is there. So the relevancy of the educational programs.
Absolutely, thank you. Bernhard.
I think really for me, I think we need to think of refugees' needs at their level and hear their voices. I think scholars and academics are very good at projecting, their expertise and sort of their grand pronouncements on phenomena, but we have to get to the level of listening better to the people that we're actually studying. So this book project I mentioned, again, is one way that we're doing this. As scholars, we are indeed in the ivory tower, but that shouldn't be limiting. We can also leave the tower and make a difference with our research skills, and then use that learning to ideally use our public and loud mouthpiece to make a difference for people we can help. So I think it's important to enact change through working with those that we say we study and we care about, to give them a voice.
Thank you very much. Jackie.
So I'll pick up on that and say my piece of advice would be that everyone can make a difference. I know these issues seem quite complex, and when you start to scratch the surface, there's multiple layers to it, but I think particularly in tertiary education, this is an area where everyone can play a very clear role and make a difference. We have a goal of 15 by 30, so trying to reach 15%, so moving that needle that Aya talked about, not just from 1% in 2019 to 5% where it is now, but to get it up to 15% of eligible refugees accessing tertiary education by 2030, and this is part of our Aiming Higher campaign. And I think the only way we're going to get there is through the collaboration that was talked about, and by people recognizing that everyone can make a contribution. So be it a student, be it a university professor, be it a private sector actor, be it an individual who wants to make a contribution. This is an area where I think there's really tangible opportunities for everyone to come together, and I think together we can really make an impactful difference, both for women, for men, for students everywhere, and really for the world's displaced.
Absolutely. And on those stirring words from our panel, it's only left for me to say thank you very much for your initial remarks. And we are now going to move over to the Q&A. So we have somebody walking around with a microphone, should you like to ask a question. And we're going to start with a question from the wonderful student-led initiative here at the Graduate Institute. Please.
Hi, so I'm Rafaela from the Migration Initiative. First of all, I want to say thank you for the panel. And to add with the initiative, we collaborate with the Graduate Institute every year to give a refugee student a scholarship here. And I have a question regarding the challenges faced by the universities. So you talked a little bit about Switzerland and the US and politics. So what are the challenges for these institutions to be able to receive refugees from their countries or from outside of their countries and to implement this, so bureaucratically or financial challenges? And also, to which extent bureaucracy in this political scenario poses these challenges, and how can institutions overcome this and make sure that they can receive more and more refugees?
Thank you very much. Jackie, would you like to start?
Sure. So I think lots of challenges, I think, are faced by universities, but not insurmountable. So you're right in terms of sometimes there's challenges in terms of if you're trying to provide a complementary pathway. So if a refugee is in a host country and you're trying to welcome them into Switzerland, obviously you have to look at what are some of the legal implications for doing that within this country. But as was mentioned, there's a huge amount of work that's being done on complementary pathways and exploring those options. And I actually think Switzerland has been quite progressive in creating those opportunities. And we've got great examples of places where that has been granted, sometimes as short-time student visas where people can come and study, or sometimes for longer-term terms where they can come and, as they're being resettled, have the opportunity to study. I think when it comes to certification, this is another area that Aya touched on, where often students from refugee backgrounds aren't necessarily carrying their past degrees or certificates, and sometimes the universities are completely inaccessible to get these credentialings from them. We've got a great collaboration with UNESCO that's working on something called the Qualifications Passport, which recognize prior learning, and so it's a way that we can actually help universities be able to recognize the prior learning, even if your transcript isn't accessible, so that you can provide those opportunities. And we've also seen lots of universities, not just private universities, but look at more flexible admin criteria so that students can kind of come into these programs. So recognizing even if a student doesn't have, a secondary education certificate because they weren't able to carry that, but it's clear they've gone through this program, they've started a university degree, being able to recognize them as an adult and having sort of an adult education program, which a lot of universities provide entry and opportunities for. So I think there's a variety of pieces that you need to work with universities to unpack to find the opportunities, but I think when there's a lot of goodwill and good interest from universities, both from the bottom up, so talking about student-led initiatives, but also a lot of leadership support from universities, there's always solutions that can be found. And I think one of the great examples is through some of the university networks, having them actually share what they've been able to do to mitigate some of the challenges that they've faced.
Bernhard.
Yeah, I really would just echo what Jackie just put so very clearly, that it starts with the will to make a difference, the will to help. Private universities, many private universities in the US have fairly substantial endowments, and they do have money that they can put toward humanitarian efforts that can also play well for them in terms of public relations. That's not why they should do it. That should definitely not be the overriding reason, but it can also simply be the right thing to do and make their profile a more friendly one, because frankly, with universities charging very high tuition, they don't always look so friendly So also, how, in my case, in the case of George Washington University in downtown Washington, D.C., housing is definitely a challenge. That's something that, for example, Guilford College, which I mentioned with every college a refuge, every campus a refuge, does not have the same kind of housing crunch that we have. And the other thing is that taking on a refugee student or student of refugee background or a scholar, it's not just a one-time thing. It's a commitment over potentially many years. It may also involve their family over a long time. And that's certainly something that they can do, but it takes thoughtful planning and real commitment. So it starts with the will to want to do something. And then as Jackie said, many things can follow and can be done, but it starts that way.
Absolutely, and thank you, Bernhard, for the reminder as well that there are scholars and academics who are also on the move, who are fleeing. There are teachers who also make up part of these refugee populations. Very important point. So our online audience, you have someone who is dedicated entirely to checking and seeing what questions you have that are coming in. And so please keep her busy. Sivan is sitting here right in front of us to help you with that. And I will take any more questions. We have one at the back there, please.
Hi, good evening. My name is Roland Chauville from Oxfam. I apologize, I missed the beginning, but I was wondering if you had good examples or good stories of civil society. You mentioned that working in that space, either led by refugee women or working on those issues that are supporting education of women across the globe. I'd like to ask that question about good examples of civil society in that space. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any examples of civil society? Do you have? No?
I'll start, and then hopefully others will complement. So I think we talked a little bit earlier about the importance of providing support throughout the continuum, and I think this has been a huge role that civil society has played, especially as we look at some of the wraparound support that needs to take place. So one of the things that we're encouraging through the Global Compact on refugees is the focus on ensuring that refugees are included within the national systems of the hosting government. And this way we can ensure sustainable investments that are going into education that benefit both refugees but host communities, while also making sure that the quality of education that's available for refugees is, in fact, quality learning. But often what that means is that we need a lot of civil society to play important roles with that wraparound support. The language programs that Aya talked about earlier, making sure that people can help with transitioning in, providing, cash grants, other support for parents and also for children as they're integrating into these systems, I think is pivotal. And we see a huge number of NGOs that are playing really important work within this space. Also in terms of providing guidance for teachers on how to create an enabling and welcoming environment when you are welcoming students from a refugee background, because I think that's so important too in overcoming issues of discrimination by creating opportunities for people not only to learn together but to play together. And I think civil society has been doing a great amount of work within this space as we look at the education continuum, but then also at the tertiary level too. So again, that language learning is so important. We also have a lot of civil society that are providing support with bridging programs into tertiary. So some of these are on the language side, providing language programs that enhance language learning for academic study. So taking those language skills to the next level, especially if people are learning and the language of instruction is in a language that they might be less familiar with. Also, the development of digital skills. We're finding that more and more important in the tertiary space all around the world. And often refugee communities don't have access to these programs on the same rate as maybe their peers. And so a lot of these bridging programs are also providing some of these essential elements so that students can, when they get to tertiary studies, they can really excel. And so we've seen great programs like Chiron that has been doing some of this work, NRC, Save the Children, a whole host of NGOs within this space. And I think Oxfam has been doing incredible work also in this regard. So I think that's why we said I think everyone has a role to play, and particularly as we look at providing that support to students and their families, so that they have a holistic approach to supporting their academic study.
Absolutely, and I mentioned the Geneva Global Hub on Education and Emergencies. Now, we don't have I sit on the steering committee of that, we don't have a focus specifically on higher education, but as Aya and Atalanti have both said, making sure that pipeline is a terrible metaphor, but making sure that that's not leaky and we're not losing girl children and women, young women through that also makes a huge difference. And there you have Enfants du Monde, you have Plan International, there's the International Network on Education and Emergencies that has a large number of members around the world, many civil society organizations. And so I think there are a few spaces in the world where you don't see civil society being active, and this is definitely one where it's very active indeed. Yeah. Atalanti?
I'd like to echo that. There are, from my experience, and we work with very small organizations, civil society organizations, and there is an enormous focus on the education of women. We have a wonderful program that we're working with in one of the refugee camps in Iraq, and it was specifically developed to gather the women who have been survivors of gender-based violence, and there is the language training, the IT training, leadership training, and then moving them out into society. So what would be interesting would be to find a way to coordinate all of that, because I think that's what's one of the issues in the world that we work in, is that there are so many wonderful things happening in a very disparate way. And if we could harness all that incredible work that's happening with, transfer of knowledge, and we would be even further ahead.
How do we make that, those 1,000 flowers that are blooming into a garden that is actually holistically useful and beautiful? Absolutely. Right, we have 7 more minutes for questions. So we have the lady at the back there, please.
Thank you so much for this incredible panel. It's truly very insightful. My name is Nazarki. I'm an international student here at a university in Geneva. And my question is, do you usually have a plan, or do you set a plan when working with these NGOs, organizations, or universities? And if you do, where do you start? For example, do you start by building schools that help and educate women and help them apply to universities? Of course, it might depend on the situation, but where do you begin, and how do you start by creating a plan?
Yes, where do you start? Great question. Atalanti, where do you usually start, or does it depend?
I actually think none of these things have a beginning or an end. They kind of happen, and there's an opportunity, or there's something that happens, or somebody that's inspired. I recently was made aware, and it's not a tertiary education program, but it is a women's leadership program that has been developed. Is being developed in Liberia by the past president of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who was a Nobel Prize winner, and she is now creating a leadership program for women from all the African countries. So she's actually gathering these women, bringing whole cohorts together. So where did it begin? I guess it came from an idea, a desire, a recognition of an issue, and then collaboration. I think those are the things that come together to make it happen.
Would you like to add to that, Jackie?
I mean, I think you said it beautifully. I would just add into that, I think having scholars be part of the conversations, so to help build from that idea is so important. And we've got a great tertiary refugee student network that is also helping to bring together the ideas and different experiences from different scholars of refugee background from around the world, so that they can share together, amplify their voices, help create new ideas and solutions as well. So I think you're right, it starts with an idea, and it starts with a gathering of people behind, and I think it's central to have students like yourself, like Aya, to be a part of those discussions to build together.
Another question? There was another one at the back. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you. My name is Maxine. I come from the same small private university as Unhcr does. And we're part, we're part of the student council, so we really feel like we can make that difference that you guys have been talking about. But we wanted to ask, or I specifically wanted to ask, what local organizations can we work with, and how does the plan start from there? I know working alongside with professors would help as well, but yeah, that's basically my main question.
Sure, no worries. So I'll start. And just to note that I think one of the right places to start is in this room. We've heard about great initiatives also from the Graduate Institute as well that is supporting refugees. And so I think bringing some of these conversations together to learn how others have made this happen. I think you also have Switzerland for UNHCR, who could be an important partner in having conversations and connecting you, as well as we've got an office that's responsible for Switzerland that can also connect you to some of the work that's happening. I do think having a group of motivated students who can come together and say we want to do something as a university and taking that to your leadership is really important to get their buy-in. But I think all the better if you can come with a plan and if you can show what others have done and how you plan to do that within your own university. So happy to work with you on that as well. I'm based in Switzerland. I'll give you my contact. But I do think that there's great ideas and inspiration that you can build off from others in this room as well who have made this happen.
Absolutely. Do we have another question? Yes, thank you, Savan.
Yes, so we have an online question by Samuel Arnold who says, "Hello, I work as a project leader for refugee initiatives at IKEA, Switzerland. We also see the cooperation of private and municipal organizations that have the same goal, to enable refugees to integrate in a sustainable and good way as one of the most important measures for success. We see education as the most sustainable and long-living measure for this. My question is this: what has been the biggest impact of this pandemic on your refugee initiatives, and what are the biggest challenges and measures that can counter them?"
Seems like the questions is for you, Jackie.
Sure. So I will hope that my other panelists will chime in on this as well. But I will say that COVID was and created a huge challenge when it came to education. We know schools all around the world were closed, and for refugee communities in particular, a lot of the continuous learning efforts that governments tried to mobilize or different education institutions tried to mobilize really didn't reach the vast majority of refugees. We're doing a study right now to look at the numbers, but it's a huge majority of refugees who had little to no access to continuous learning when we look at primary and secondary education when schools were closed. And what was the impact of this? Well, one potential long-term impact is you do have those times of learning loss. And what we've also seen is that the amount of class time and days that refugees have spent outside the classroom is larger than when you look at the global scale. So they've had more time out of the classroom, they haven't had as much opportunities for continuous learning, and so the potential impact of that we're seeing, and we did a study with Malala Fund, for the potential for females, it's staggering that up to 50% of females might not return to the classroom. And so when we look at that education continuum, when we look at that pipeline of women coming up through tertiary education, we have a huge challenge in front of us that we could backslide on all of the successes that we had made in the years leading up to COVID to help get more and more opportunities for study. And so I think there's tremendous work going in to mitigate some of those measures. One of the things that we're trying to do is advocate for greater support and resourcing and funding in creating opportunities that attract students back to the classroom, particularly for girls. We're also trying to make important investments in communities so that they can have the infrastructure, they can have the capacities, they can have the abilities to build on the continuous learning efforts that were made available during that time. Because I think a lot of the concern right now is looking at how we can build more resilient education systems in case school closures continue or in case they sustain. But one of the first things that we need to do is make sure that these programs, one, are designed for inclusion from the start, so include refugees and low resource contexts in mind as they're being designed, but also we make the really important investments into these contexts to be able to ensure that they have the connectivity, they have the skills in terms of digital literacy, they have the mobile device if they require a WhatsApp from a teacher giving them guidance. At the tertiary level, we've been delighted to see the fact that a lot of our programs have been able to pivot quite well and provide continuous learning opportunities for people from a more remote side. But again, this took a huge amount of using multimodal different approaches from WhatsApp and direct phone calls to individuals to the use of different online platforms and different tools to make sure people were able to study along with paper packets and what you can imagine. So I think there's a lot that we need to do moving forward, and I think the biggest thing is to double down in the investments that we had made in education to date to make sure we don't backslide further.
Thank you so much. Atalanti.
I'd like to say that I think the slippage for women is where we've really lost, and it's not only amongst the refugee community, but it's in the most remote and rural communities. Women are really, the young girls are not going back to school. And it's all related also to poverty and the fact that parents are selling their children to get married. So it's multiple. And I think on the other side, I think you said it very correctly, that there's been such a loss, a couple of years loss of education, which means already these refugee children were not getting the optimum education, and then in addition they add another 2 years of no education whatsoever. So the catch-up is enormous, and then the digital divide then comes in. So it's a mammoth task, and I think the most important thing is that we keep talking about it and bring it out there, and there are amazing civil society organizations that are really reaching out and doing the work.
And I'm delighted to give the last word on this panel to Aya.
Thank you. Just to answer the question, first of all, I want to thank IKEA because we know that it does a lot of work with Unhcr, and they are giving the opportunity for refugees in Switzerland, for example, to be engaged in the livelihood. So I hope that this will continue more and more. But for the question, I will just answer it differently, because for me, I see it's challenging for sure, because we lived through this, and I'm sure that if there are any students here would feel the same. It's kind of hard to focus in online classes. Sometimes you're like, I want to sleep and so on, but don't do that. I didn't do it. I tried my best. But really, it was really hard to adapt for this new system. But I would say that if the inclusion of the percentage of refugees going and accessing higher education from 1% to 5%, 2019, 2021, that is the pandemic time. So I believe that this allows us to think about it in this way, that this gives alternative ways of education. So maybe we just need to focus more on how to make sure that we provide the refugee community with tools that they need for the online education. I think this would be also nice for women, because as you know, in some regions and in some cultures, women are not allowed to go outside after a certain age because they're married, because of what is the neighbor is gonna say, and so on and so on. But really, maybe an online education could be the key in this situation. So the women will be able to enroll from their homes and try to get their education and try to get a certificate and so on. So I believe that the pandemic was really a lesson, not only from the education perspective, but also many things have been changed: work, the livelihood, the education system, and so on. So I believe that this will even be from the cost side and the financial side, it will be lower because you need the internet, and maybe universities will be willing, I don't know, in the future to say, okay, I can provide my classes and they will be online, but for example, this percentage discount for refugees and so on. So I believe that we can try to look at it also from the positive side and try to feel that alternatives will come in the future if will be the opportunities, and we put more focus and we try to drag it to the positive side. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for dragging us to the positive side. And thank you to you and to all of our panel members here tonight. It's been fascinating. So as we file off, I'm just going to introduce Christina, and forgive us for cutting in a little bit to your time because this was just a very exciting discussion. So Christina Davies is the Executive Director of Switzerland for UNHCR, which is the UN Refugee Agency's national partner for Switzerland. And she started her career in business development, traveling extensively and setting up a company in Beirut. In 2005, she was Director of Development for the leading business school in INSEAD in France, and contributed 200 million to their second capital campaign. And then she joined UNHCR in different private sector partnership functions in Paris and Copenhagen, and started the private sector partnership activities in Switzerland in 2017. She is an alum of the Graduate Institute, holding a degree in international relations from this very institution. So thank you to the panel, and please welcome Christina.
Good evening all, and thank you very much for those who have remained and attended. I thought that the quality of the exchanges was extremely insightful. And let me just sum up a few of the exchanges that were said here. I think that when we talk about barriers, and I'm afraid, Aya, that you've been the role model that we want to put forward today. We talk about the barriers, language. Well, as an Iraqi, what it is to be going to Turkey, what it is to be arriving in Switzerland. We're talking about very different languages, of course. You are a woman in a man's world, and this is, I think, one of the most important aspects we wanted to come forward to, and we're very happy to have partnered with civil groups like Giving Women. I think that we're talking about gender, we're talking about curricula. Atalanti talked about the importance of the secondary, and from the secondary to the tertiary. I think that we're also talking about access to quality education, because this really last mile makes a whole difference when you really try to enroll in a university degree. We had from Jackie the focus on secondary, how we can all make a difference. She mentioned her university in Canada. From Bernhard, we heard from the very high tuition cost that can be another barrier, and the overview. Aya, you said that you can become drivers of peace, and I think that this was a very nice framing of the discussion. You also talked about providing a second life, and I always think it's not about refugees. We human beings, oftentimes, I prefer it in English because in English we have 9 lives versus in French you only have 7 lives. But it is true that, you have several lives in your own life, and I think that this is the real power of education. You can be given the possibility of a second life. So I'd like to really end on that note of the role models. I would like to obviously thank the Graduate Institute for providing this incredible venue tonight. I'd like to thank the board members that we have here present, our chairman, Cédric Unhcr, Julie, which I have seen, Julie Vin here is also a trustee of the foundation. And I think that we have had more than sufficient examples and illustrations of a call to action. So when we talk about a call to action, you can refer to Stephanie, and I would like to thank her personally for being the master organizing this on our side. So, you know, you want to invest in refugee women, it's 3,000 Swiss francs. We're talking about very, very tangible possibility. But you also want to perhaps talk to Aya. She is finishing university, she wants and she needs a job. So let us also try to insert people into the labor market. And last but not least, I think that companies, civil society, academia, we can all have a role to play, whether it is funding, whether it is raising awareness, whether it is employing. And I would say if we have changed the perception of one person in this room tonight, we have made it an amazing story tonight. And with ending, I think that the power of music is a very natural one. And so we would like to welcome Yusra Dahbi. I hope that I am pronouncing correctly. She has an internationally acclaimed career as a soloist and is a master of the makam. So she will bring her out now, and we will finish with a couple of her pieces. So thank you very much all, and we can meet afterwards. Thank you.
Merci, Christina. Je suis francophone, malheureusement, mais je suis vraiment arabophone, francophone, alors vous choisissez. Je pense que le français, c'est plus simple. Je suis ravie d'être parmi vous, de partager un moment avec vous. Et ce soir, je vais vous présenter durant ce mini-concert quelques formes musicales de la tradition musicale savante de l'Orient arabe. Et comme nous savons tous que la seconde moitié du XIXe siècle, elle a connu une conjoncture sociopolitique favorable qui a donné un second souffle à l'Orient arabe. Et cette période, elle a connu des dynamiques de réforme au niveau et de renouvellement dans plusieurs domaines, comme la religion, la politique, les lettres et la musique. Et donc je vais commencer par un morceau, disons une chanson du patrimoine irakien, Faul. Alors je vous invite de chanter avec moi. C'est une chanson d'amour dans le mode de Hijaz. Alors il faut dire que dans la tradition arabe, musicale arabe, l'improvisation, elle est toujours là. Alors, tant qu'il y a une mélodie, il y aura de l'improvisation ou instrumentale ou vocale, ou les deux.
بسلم عليهم عليهم صعبان الفرجة علي يا بشتقنا إليهم والله مريدة مريدة بلاني بلوى فوق النخل فوق يابا فوق النخل فوق مدري لا ما خده يابا مدري القمر فوق والله مريدة بلاني بلوى أمان 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 أمان
Merci. Une chanson d'amour de la Tunisie. C'est une chanson bédouine. يا مجواني يا مجواني يا يا مجواني نختم على الأوهام والله يا مجواني يا مجواني هي الريحة جابلي والعجاج عماني فوق عليكم يا زارعين الفل والله يفوق عليكم يفوق عليكم لاش الغريب يموت والله بين ايديكم شيع راجع شيعتهم بالعين والله مشيع راجع مشيع راجع الوحشة والغربة والله يخلوا مواجع يا مجواني نختم على الأوهام والله يا مجواني. On m'a prévenu que je ne dois pas dépasser 15 minutes. Alors, je pense qu'on va terminer avec une chanson. Aussi du patrimoine tunisien. C'est une chanson qui raconte en fait des femmes qui pleurent le départ de leur mari, forcés d'immigrer vers le nord pour trouver du travail. Et c'est une chanson, disons, du sud tunisien, exactement.
وحش الثرى وحش الثرى سراوي برودي هوى الفتي وحش الثراوي برودي وحش الثرى سراوي برودي هوى الفتي وحش الثراوي برودي ما صاب عشيري مؤلفة هوى الفتي ما صاب عشيري مؤلفة ما صاب عشيري مؤلفة صدري على صدرك حريري مخالفة وحش الثرى سراوي برودي هوى الفتي وحش الثراوي برودي وحش الثرى